Hey everyone. So this is a call. What I want to talk about is actually a big component of the sexual energy coaching program, which I call the Sovereign Tantric, that I've developed. Linked down below the video. It took me over a year to develop this program, and one of the things that is probably one of the key components of this program is the idea of how to gather and harness sexual energy at the moment of orgasm. A lot of transmutation practices, and the idea of transmutation is a slightly different concept than what I'm talking about here. So transmutation is to shift, sexual transmutation specifically is to shift sexual energy into something else, which is kind of a misnomer because really all you're doing is you're shifting the energy out of the sexual center, so it's not so concentrated there, and you're distributing it within yourself, within the totality of your being. So that's transmutation. In the case of this idea of gathering sexual energy, yes, it's kind of transmutation, but the issue is that this is at the moment of orgasm. It's an instantaneous moment. Oftentimes it comes on very, very intensely, and it's quite difficult to actually do much of anything at that moment. So there are various practices available to those individuals who are interested in working on this. You could look up the Big Draw, which I think is a Montauk Chia thing, as well as the Body Electric School goes into the Big Draw. But what I'd like to teach is called Mahabandha. Mahabandha, or the Great Lock. I have several videos in which I've kind of talked about this idea of becoming implosive. But I want to go ahead and share with you an experience. And I'm hoping this experience illustrates how this gathering or this harnessing of orgasmic energy works. Last weekend. And the first thing I should also say is that I've been practicing transmutation practices, sexual transmutation practices, abstaining from ejaculation, tantric sexual progressions. I've been doing all these things for a very long time. And the reason this video is kind of interesting to me to do is because this experience I had last weekend was significantly different than some of the other experiences I had before. And the reason it was different was because of how precise it felt. This will make sense once I go into it. So, in the midst of a sexual experience, I didn't intend to have an orgasm during this particular experience, but sometimes you slip and you have oops, whatever, right? So it happens. So what ended up happening to me is that this orgasmic energy started to rise. In other words, I felt the edge. So there's a couple different things that a person has to choose at the moment of orgasm. And again, when I say this, not that women can't gather the energy in this way, but generally speaking, I'm speaking to men. Because men, we discharge outwardly the majority of the time. So there's several things that are going to determine where this energy flows. One of those, for instance, is where's your mind, right? So for instance, if you are focused on some body parts on your partner, or if you're in fantasy or some kinky thought, then the energy is going to become dispersed, right? So first thing you want to do is you want to make sure you're centered, right? So being present with what's happening within yourself. So last weekend, it was build up. I think I hadn't ejaculated in maybe, it's about 3 weeks at that point. And the orgasm came on really quick. I didn't see it coming. It was boom. It was just like boom. I got overly heated and I couldn't stop it. So and the idea is not to stop it. That's the other thing. When you're doing these practices, the last thing in your mind, if you start to reach an orgasm or that point, the last thing you want to do is try to stop it, right? So you have a choice in this moment, because one is you can't stop it, right? You have to stop doing something. So for instance, if you're having sex and you feel like you're getting close, that's when you need to stop. Not right when the orgasm starts you start feeling the pulsation around the genitals. It's point of no return at that point. So what you can do then is you can choose to gather the energy, or you can choose to relax and let it be, let it kind of take its own course, right? So, and I won't say either one is better or worse or right or wrong, but this video is about the choice to gather. So, moment of orgasm hits. This is what happened to me last weekend. Immediately I did my usual thing, which is I pull a very gentle, precise root lock, or mula bandha. You contract, specifically I usually start from around the genitals because that's where the pressure is at that moment. I contract inward, perineum contracts, anus contracts. Anyway, there's a lifting. Again, it's hard to be super precise at that moment. So that was the first sort of wave of orgasmic energies. I gathered it, right? And the second wave, though, I was like, oh, because I felt that once I hooked into the orgasmic energy, then what ended up happening is I felt this amplification, right? So I connected with it, I pulled the lock, I felt this amplification. Then I immediately, after I've had that root lock pulled, then I lifted up. Let me go ahead and show you. So real simple. Okay, so that was like a super sloppy Uddiyana Bandha or diaphragm lock, right? Quick lift up. Something else you could do is a quick sniff of air in. I find lifting a little more effective than the sniff of air. Sniff of air may be easier though. The point is to engage the solar plexus region in some way. For me, it's the lift. I do a little quick lift, so root lock, quick lift. Usually I have a little bit of air sniffed in as well. Then what I noticed was there was a pickup. So all of a sudden, and the other thing I should say is Uddiyana Bandha means to fly up. To fly up, right? So it kind of describes exactly what it does. So root lock held, boom, fly up. Then I felt the orgasm start to roll. It started to amplify even more. So it started to pick up. Then I was like, oh, and again, this is really slow. I'm doing this, by the way. This wasn't like a rush moment of like boom, 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 really quick. I actually dragged this out, and this was over the course of maybe about 15 seconds that I'm pulling these little tricks, right? So root lock, Uddiyana Bandha, and then I was like, oh, I felt the sort of vibration starting to spread in my body. So the next thing I did was tongue at the roof of the mouth, and I tucked the chin gently, and then I rolled the eyes up. And then it started to gather more within myself, and I felt this rolling of energy, and it kept rolling inward and upward and expanding and expanding. So the other thing I should mention is that this orgasm, when it first set in, it was not super strong. It felt very subtle, right? So this wasn't one of those situations in which it was going to be a mind-blowing orgasm because there was so much pressure. I wasn't at that point. This was kind of a normal orgasm that I simply harnessed and gathered and directed. And what it did is every time I pulled one of these locks, the root lock, the diaphragm lock, the tongue lock at the roof of the mouth, the rolling the eyes up, what it did is it gathered the energy, amplified it, and it was able to continue. So this particular orgasm lasted, it was about 3 to 4 minutes. The aftershocks probably continued up to 5. And the whole time I'm sort of engaging it, because I found as I was engaging it during the orgasmic effect, in other words, not letting the energy trickle out. I was maintaining my center. I was doing deep breaths. I was pulling and relaxing root lock. I was doing the diaphragm lock and lifting and relaxing, lifting and relaxing. I was doing all these things, and it just kept cultivating the energy, and it kept building and building and building and building. And again, this is after the first surge of orgasm. And that was what was different. So typically, I'll go ahead and real quickly describe how it usually works. So usually, orgasm comes on. I've had sex for 4 or 5 hours at that point. It's intense. It's powerful. It's like, boom. And all I do is root lock, sniff of air in, tongue at the roof, mouth, roll the eyes up. I do whatever I can really quickly at that moment. And it works. It works. It leads to very powerful, pronounced orgasms. But this was different, again, because it didn't come on super strong. And instead, I made it stronger by gathering the energy and directing it and building it. So hopefully this makes sense. It's difficult to describe these kinds of circumstances, but the idea is that just always keep in mind the simple principle here, which is energy flows to where the attention goes. We've been given, innately built into us is the ability to traverse our nervous system, to engage our nervous system. How do we do this? We do this through contract, relax, through feeling, through sensing. So contracting, relaxing, feeling, and sensing. So the more you center your energy, root lock, diaphragm lock, these are centering techniques. Okay, they center your awareness within yourself because you're choosing to contract something within your body. And so this pulls the energy to it. And as you do this, you're gathering, you're harnessing, you're building. And the other thing I'll say, and this is the final thing I'll say about this, is that afterwards, although this always happens to me, if I ejaculate, usually I'm just done, right? I should say, orgasms I can have many, right? But they're not always super potent. Sometimes they're very subtle, and I could have a ton of those little subtle ones. But if it's like a proper orgasm attached to an ejaculation, usually it's just one. But after this particular circumstance, although I didn't have any more sex that day, I could have. Because the energy didn't feel dissipated. I wasn't as aroused as I was before. I wasn't as horny as I was before. So there was a dissipation in that sense. But it was more like a dislodging. Like the energy was dislodged from the sexual region and it was shifted around and upwards. So in other words, it was transmuted. So I'd be very curious about any of you out there who've kind of played with these practices, whether the Big Draw or Mahabandha or any of the things that I've recommended on this channel. But very curious if you've had any sort of experiences that are reflective of what I've just expressed to you. I'd be very, anyway, leave comments down below if you have any stories to share. With all that said, hopefully you will enjoy this video and hopefully you find this helpful and useful in some way. Thank you all.